Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome everybody to the Mesa City Council study session for the afternoon of February the 24th. All of our council is present. The first item on our agenda for this meeting is to review the agenda for our meeting upstairs in a few minutes. So council, if you could please refer to that document. I know there have been some developments. Mr. Brady, can you tell us what's changed with our agenda?
Sure. Let me just, we can go to 7, both 7A and 7B will be the introduction of the following ordinances. So we're setting the date for the public hearing to March 16th, not March 2nd, but to March 16th.
So that'll be read into the consent agenda with that new date on, and so we don't need to do anything.
Right.
Mr. Christopher will just make that.
And that'll apply to both 7A and 7B.
Okay.
And then, at the request of the applicant, all the items under 11 have been, will be, continued until April 6th. So the continuation of all the items under 11 to be continued April 6th.
Okay. So off of the consent agenda, we do have item 10A, which is the public hearing on the utility rates. And then when it comes to agenda item 11, I'll entertain a motion to continue that item, agenda items 11A through 11I to the April 6th meeting.
Correct.
Okay, does that make sense, everyone? Does that sound right?
I was just asking Jim if, can that be on consent to continue to April 6th instead of doing it separately, if that's
Yeah.
up to you.
It's fine with me to put it on consent.
Just say Kevin can read that in on the consent.
Yeah, we're just all about scheduling. I'm sorry?
Kevin Christopher, not this guy.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Right.
Yes.
Okay, well, without objection, yeah, let's move that to the, Kevin, you got that? So agenda item 11 can just be on the consent agenda to be continued into the April 6th council meeting? All right, so without objection, then I'll just take that off of my script then to not worry about that. So the only thing that's off the consent agenda at this point is the public hearing on item 10B. Okay, great. Council, any other questions regarding tonight's agenda?
I have one, Mayor.
Mr. Freeman.
6D, I just wanted to thank the Hickey family, their foundation, for their work on minor sex trafficking. As you know, we owe a great thanks to them. They're giving $175,000 for overtime and equipment and training to the police department to combat domestic minor sex trafficking in our community. And their goals are to rescue victims, investigate individuals, and dismantle organizations engaged in sex trafficking, child prostitution, or related crimes. So I want to thank Nancy and her team and all the family that support our police department. This is a great help.
Hear, hear. Council, any other comments about our agenda for tonight? Yes, Jeremy.
I have a question on 10B in regards to changing the non-residential water rates. I know that last time we had discovered that that would actually impact the HOAs, and I'm wondering if there's any update in regards to how much of those non-residential are actually HOAs and how much of that non-residential is just commercial entities. Do we have any numbers on that?
I don't know that we could separate those out.
There's no
Because
way
they
it's
come in under the commercial rate. I mean, because it could be, because of their use and who they're not considered residential. So I don't know how we could parse those out.
Okay. My other question is on item 7A, which is the new ordinance. I have a question in regards to that ordinance and what, if that ordinance had been in place last year, what would the maximum transfer cap had been based on last year's numbers?
You have we ran did you bring that with you?
Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, what I I can get really close. I don't have going backwards that way. What we did was we calculated what the transfer actually was for that, and that might get us close to that. So if you're saying, Councilman Whitaker, you're talking about the last year, so you're saying fiscal year 18-19?
Yeah, sure.
So in fiscal year 18-19, our total utility revenues were 349, 121, 861.
Yeah, we did analysis. We went back 5 years and went forward 5 years. Ryan, do you have it?
Yes, the enterprise fund transfer for fiscal year 18-19 would have been 100 and, or, yep, for using the contribution, it would have been $105 million. And last year, it was 108 actual million dollars.
I'm not following you. So with the language.
$3 million
report-
less.
Less. So
Less.
fiscal year, using the ordinance calculation, the proposed ordinance calculation, the transfer would have been a $105 million transfer. The current transfer that was done for fiscal year 18-19 was $108 million. So using the proposed ordinance, it would have been a $3 million less transfer.
Is that based on the audited financials from the CAFR, or is that, like, what numbers are you using?
No, it's based on
The actual.
the way
revenues.
the way this ordinance reads.
So what does it read? I mean, is it,
So Mayor and Councilman Whitaker, when you look at the cash flow statements that we give you whenever we talk about the enterprise fund, at the top of those cash flows has revenues. There are two revenue lines, one are rate related and one is pass-through revenues. Because some of our commodities are electric and our natural gas commodities are pass-throughs, we don't actually have a rate related to those. So if we exclude those, all other revenues for the utilities are on the top line of that cash flow. That would be what the percentages would be going against.
you're excluding commodities?
I'm excluding natural gas and electric commodities because we pass those through to the customers. There's no increase. The cost to the city is the cost to the customer.
Okay. And help me understand then what the difference are between the numbers that you guys are reporting and what numbers the CAFR show, because like from my rough calculation, based on the numbers in the CAFR, was something around $120 million for the max transfer amount.
So Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, when we're talking about the transfer, we're talking about the transfer from the enterprise fund to the general fund. In the CAFR, those would include additional transfers to various funds. Could be the Economic Investment Fund, where council gave direction to fund a couple projects through there, and other various items. In the CAFR, everything that's grouped together into larger categories. When we're looking at this, we're looking at the transfer from the enterprise fund to the general fund
So
that
you're
we've done
excluding-
through time.
You're excluding other transfers to other funds. You're not grouping them all under the general fund.
This is the only one that goes into the general fund. For the CAFR purposes, the Economic Investment Fund and some of our other funds roll into the general fund for CAFR purposes. It's a general governmental account. We're talking about just the general fund, which is the unrestricted used on general governmental operations. If there's a transfer into another specific fund, that would have a specific use for that fund. It's not general fund money. This is the standard one that we talk about every year when we talk about the transfer from the enterprise fund to the general fund.
But you're
that we've
saying
shown over
that
time.
this ordinance would exclude transfers from the enterprise fund to other funds, like the Economic Investment Fund. That would still be, you could unlimited transfer as much money as you like, or are you saying or what would limit the amount of money that goes from the enterprise fund to the economic investment?
Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, this ordinance would actually limit all transfers out of the enterprise fund, regardless of what fund they were going into. It would actually specify those exact uses and transfers, which would include the Economic Investment Fund as well. There would not be a transfer from the enterprise fund to the Economic Investment Fund if the ordinance were passed.
Okay. Yeah, I just, the math isn't adding up when I look at the numbers from the CAFR. It's coming out to about $120 million based on the formula that we were presented with in the last council meeting when we discussed this.
And we can, again, that would include a transfer into the Economic Investment Fund, which would have been scheduled for this year and for last year. That was based on council direction, so there are other transfers. But if you look at the language of this ordinance is actually looking at the enterprise fund itself and listing out exactly what uses can be used for those revenues. That includes expenses as well as transfers. If this ordinance were adopted, we would not be doing a transfer from the enterprise fund to the economic investment fund, and it would specify exactly how much could go from the enterprise fund to the general fund.
And so when we do the numbers on this ordinance moving forward in future years, would it be based on, would you use audited financials from the CAFR then I'm assuming to determine total revenue amounts for the utilities, transfers and such, or what numbers would you be binding yourself to? Because the CAFR numbers are always different than the budget office numbers.
Correct. We would be using the cash flow statement on the forecast. So when that was presented when the utility rate ordinance was first introduced in January and also talked about back in October, there was a cash flow statement that was included in that packet. That cash flow statement has the revenues, and those revenues, they do tie to the CAFR, they just don't tie to that number because the CAFR number would have depreciation. It has other accounting rules that are applied to it. We're looking at the cash that actually comes into the enterprise fund. But those are stated numbers. We do publish those numbers each year. We tie them out at the end of each year, and then these percentages would be tied to those numbers.
Yeah, I'm not talking about depreciation, but on the revenue side of the electric rate, as it's a percentage of the revenue, not accounting for any type of depreciation.
Correct. So the revenues that we will be using are the revenues that are in our cash flow statements. They're the revenues that are attached to every time we talk about utility rates or the enterprise fund and the forecast. And they're the revenues.
Candace, it's the same number we use today.
It's the same number we've always used.
To base off the current formula, which is based on inflation. So we're not changing the base number in our
Correct.
discussion here. We're being very consistent with that. So we're not changing it. We're trying to be very consistent and transparent with the budgeted number, which is discussed in front of council over weeks at a time. The CAFR number is not something we get to derive. That's done by an outside source, but they use the budgeted numbers and it has the results. So we're using the same gross revenue numbers that are used in our cash flow that dictate even our expenses, right? It dictate how much we can expand on personnel and commodities and all the operations. So we're just being consistent with the same way we've always determined the revenues or the transfer based off of today we use it as an inflation. We say we'll take no more than the inflation rate. And here we're limiting it to 25% of the gross revenues from the city for public safety services and 5% for gross revenues for the city's discretion.
So for example, if we look, and we can give you another copy of these if you need another copy of these. They were attached to the ordinances as they were introduced in January when it came to all of the utility rate ordinances. So that was electric, gas, water, wastewater, and solid waste. And we can give out another copy of that if that would help. So this is the cash flow statement that we do every time we talk about rates or any adjustments to those rates. It's also the cash flow statement that we use every time we talk about the forecast. So looking kind of back how we did last year, how we're doing this year, and then kind of forecasting where we're going to go. These are the same numbers, and they're right at the top. And I'll tell you, when it comes to water, there are 3 different categories, but we'll be looking at it in total. Residential rate revenues, non-residential rate revenues, and other revenues. For example, in 1819 actuals, the revenues for water was $145,642,646. That would be the number that would have been used as the base for the percentages that are outlined in the ordinance.
I guess.
And those revenues can tie back to the CAFR, and we can walk you through how they tie back to the CAFR. It's just that they're have different components and pieces. But we work with the finance office to make sure that our numbers tie back to what their final report was.
Yeah, I guess my main question is just that the CAFR shows $365 million in total revenue for the enterprise. How far off is that from the number that you're saying you base it off of? And is the only difference between the two numbers the fact that you're not accounting for commodities because they're a pass-through, and this is accounting for commodities. If I'm understanding you correctly, that would be the difference between the two numbers?
Correct, the numbers that I have, that should be the difference, because our pass-through for electric and natural gas for 18-19 was just under $22 million, would be pass-through revenues. So those are revenues we receive, which is really just reimbursement of cost.
And your number is roughly 343 million, then I'm gonna guess somewhere around there.
I have 356,735,583. And that was as of our October 30th. I don't believe there was any major changes after that. It was, remember, they didn't really finalize until December to close the books, but I don't believe there was any major changes after October 30th.
Okay, I'll just catch up with you guys offline to figure out how you calculated your numbers then.
Yeah, we'd be happy to walk you through how those tie back into the CAFR. You won't find that exact number, but we can tell you how they tie together, because we do confirm with the finance office to make sure that our ending numbers match their ending numbers.
Okay, great. And my second question on 7A is how much money can we extract from the utilities and still leave the utilities sustainable? Like what's the maximum number that the utilities can sustain with money being extracted from them to be transferred to the general fund?
Well, Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, as Brian pointed out earlier, had this ordinance been in place last year, we actually would have transferred $3 million less over into the general fund. So as we go forward, the ordinance has been looked at to make sure that we are not, that we are being held harmless on the general fund, but actually not increasing on the enterprise fund. So it would be the same as it is today. So there would be no change in the financial status of the enterprise fund.
It's near the same, Candace. I don't want to be held.
Correct.
I don't want someone to say.
It's actually
I don't want
right.
someone upstairs to say you were off when it wasn't exact.
Right, it won't be
We tried to
exact.
create a formula here going forward that would be as close to what was already built into the forecast, but creating very specific buckets and percentages here versus just using inflator. So it's, I mean, it's not exact, but it's
Correct.
close to the numbers. That's how we drove these percentages that are in the ordinance.
And Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, one of the main differences between what we're doing today and what this ordinance would do would be actually to designate those funds and the purposes of those funds as part of the transfer, and we do not have that today. So that would be a different change from today's practice as well. So same dollar amount, only with a designated purpose.
Yeah, I guess, let me ask my question in a different way. How much money as a percentage can you extract from the utility revenues before you break the utilities?
So Mayor and Council, that's not a question. That's a loaded question. That's a policy discussion between the council and what you want to do as far as revenues. There is no formula for answering that question.
We're not there now, and we don't want to find.
We don't want to be,
Okay.
we don't have an answer to that question.
We have no idea how much money we can extract from our utilities until the utilities don't work. Like, that's never been asked before.
I think it's a hypothetical that we've never delved into, you know, how much, but it's an interesting question. You ought to explore it with the utility folks when you get a chance. Any other questions? Jeremy, is that it for you?
Sorry, I didn't know
Oh,
you were talking to me.
okay.
Yes, I'm finished.
All right, thanks. Council, any other questions about tonight's agenda upstairs? Okay, moving on then. The next agenda item on this meeting's agenda is to hear reports on meetings and conferences attended. Now, we've had a busy few days, lots of good things happening. Jen, why don't we start with you? We had a great event in your district today.
I'm
Yes.
still basking in the excitement from this morning when we broke ground on the grid. It's a mixed-use development at Mesa Drive in Maine, approximately. It creates a neighborhood that brings lifestyle amenities, 3 luxury housing options, a healthy full-service restaurant, and creative Class A office space. It's downtown's social living room, bookending the east end of our downtown with a $75 million investment. And so that will be, the first phase will be opening at the end of this year. So I'm excited about that. I also would like to mention a workshop Portal to Places workshop conducted by Nidhi Galati from New York that explored placemaking where a transit stop is the queen of the street, prioritizing our streets around people experience instead of car movement. Some of our staff was there. Thank you to Transportation Director RJ Zeter for attending, as well as our Planning and Zoning Director Nana. I will not attempt your last name because I'm not sure. Apaya? Is that her? No. Oh, okay, all right. For attending this community event, so thank you. And then, of course, spring training, which I'll let the guy who's pitched the first.
Well, thank you. I would love to talk about spring training. It was a fun weekend. We had the first home game for the Cubs on Saturday, and I'm glad that we pushed it back, a few hours. Those who were here on Saturday recall we had some heavy rains, so the Cubs very astutely pushed the starting time back to 6 p.m., and I was really taken back by what a large crowd they had for a rainy day. It was a near sellout, so that bodes well for what the rest of the season is going to look like. And then the following day was the first day for the Oakland Athletics, and again, a great turnout there as well. So I've said it before, if you live in Mesa, Arizona, and you're not going to a spring training game, you're really missing out. This is one of those hashtag why I live in Mesa things to do. So please look at the calendar. It's a wonderful, relaxing, great family activity. So encourage everyone to go and enjoy baseball for the next month here in Mesa, Arizona. Council, other activities you'd like to report on? Yes, Mr. Freeman.
Mayor, thank you. You know, this morning I had the opportunity to go with our fire chief, Chief Camilli. She made a presentation to an individual, a school teacher who was at a baseball game, and the umpire was experiencing some type of medical concern, and actually he went unconscious, and she applied an AED. The CPR was performed, and AED was applied and shocked him twice and brought him back to life, and medics were able to keep him alive, and he's alive today because of great pre-care from our emergency services, and this was over at Westwood. So I'd like to thank our fire and life safety folks, Gene DeStories, and the fire chief for being conscious of that, because knowing CPR and how to apply an AED will save somebody's life, and appreciate fire and all the others involved too. That was a great deal, so thank you.
It's a great story. Thanks. Council, anything else you'd like to share with us? If not, Mr. Brady, what does our schedule look like?
Just a reminder to the city council that this Thursday, February 27th, beginning at 7:30 a.m., we'll be meeting for the council strategic planning meeting. It'll be at the Parks and Recreation Community Facilities Boardroom, and that's located at 708 West Baseline Road. So we'll see you there on Thursday morning.
Okay, if there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you, Mr. Luna. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.